Sometimes the people we take in are the ones who change us the most. On a quiet farm, tucked away in the heart of America, a struggling single father opens his door to a lost woman with no past and no place to go. What he doesn't realize is, behind her tired eyes and quiet demeanor lies a connection to a hidden farming dynasty, and a choice that will reshape both their lives forever. This isn't just a story about second chances. It's about how kindness sows the seeds of something far greater than anyone could imagine, ready to discover how a simple act of compassion can unlock a world of hidden legacies and unexpected love. But before we dive in, if you believe in the power of good stories and second chances, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us continue sharing heartfelt tales that stay with you long after the last word. Now, let's begin. A struggling single dad took in a lost woman only to uncover her ties to a hidden farming dynasty. The wind rolled across the flat plains like an old hymn, soft but persistent, carrying with it the scent of tilled earth and the faint promise of rain. Jonas Whitaker stood at the edge of his modest plot of land, eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his worn hat. The fields stretched out before him in stubborn rows, quiet but demanding. He'd worked this soil all his life, and yet every year it felt like starting over. Behind him, the farmhouse leaned slightly to the left, paint peeling, its white boards weathered by time and storms. It wasn't much, but it had been enough to raise his daughter Maisie after the accident took his wife 4 years ago. Enough to keep food on their table, most days. Enough to keep him tethered when life had tried to sweep his feet out from under him. But lately, Jonas had begun to feel something gnawing at the edges. The loneliness of long nights, the relentless grind of making ends meet, the quiet ache of wondering if this was all life would ever be. He wiped his brow, glancing up at the grey clouds gathering in the distance. A storm was on its way. Just as he was about to head back to the house, something unusual caught his eye. A figure, small and hunched, walking along the dirt road by the edge of his property. Jonas squinted. Whoever it was, they didn't belong. People didn't usually wander these parts, not without a reason, and certainly not at dusk with a storm brewing. He hesitated for a moment, then set down his tools and walked toward the fence line. As he drew closer, the figure became clearer. A woman, thin and ragged, her clothes clinging to her like remnants of another life. Her hair was matted, and her steps faltered as though she'd been walking for miles with no destination. Jonas felt something tug inside his chest. "Evening," he called gently, not wanting to startle her. The woman stopped, blinking at him as if seeing another human being for the first time in days. She looked worn down, not just physically, but in her eyes, like someone carrying too many burdens for too long. "Storm's coming," Jonas said, nodding toward the clouds. "You shouldn't be out here." She glanced up at the sky, then back at him, lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Without pressing, he opened the gate and stepped closer, keeping his tone even. "I've got a dry porch, warm meal if you're needing one." For a heartbeat, she seemed to weigh whether to trust him. He could see the wariness in her eyes, a look he understood all too well. Life had taught both of them to be cautious. Finally, she gave a faint nod. Jonas motioned her toward the farmhouse, falling in step beside her but giving her space. He didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations. Some people, he knew, had reasons they couldn't yet voice. Inside, Maisie was setting the table, her pigtails bouncing as she hummed to herself. She looked up when Jonas walked in, her bright eyes flickering curiously toward the stranger behind him. "This is a guest," Jonas said carefully, glancing at the woman. "Maisie, why don't you wash up and set out another plate?" he added. The woman lingered by the door, her posture stiff, eyes scanning the room like she wasn't sure she belonged. Jonas gestured toward a chair. Sit. I'll get the kettle going. For a moment, she stood frozen, then finally eased into the chair, fingers tapping anxiously on the wood. Maisie peeked back into the room, smiling shyly. "Hi, I'm Maisie." The woman's lips twitched, almost forming a smile. "Hello." Jonas poured hot water over tea leaves, the silence between them stretching, but not uncomfortable. He knew better than to pry. As they ate, the woman kept her head down, saying little, but he noticed how she carefully watched every small kindness. The way Maisie passed her the butter without being asked, the way Jonas refilled her cup without a word, as if she wasn't used to people offering things freely. After dinner, Maisie skipped off to get ready for bed, leaving Jonas and the woman alone in the quiet kitchen. He wiped his hands on a dish towel, then leaned back against the counter. "You don't have to tell me anything if you're not ready," he said softly. "But if you need a place to rest, you're welcome to stay a night or two." She looked up at him then, really looked. There was something guarded but vulnerable in her eyes. A woman who had built walls so high she couldn't remember when they first went up. "My name's Evelyn," she said finally, voice barely above a whisper. Jonas gave a small nod. "Jonas." She hesitated, then added, I won't be any trouble." He offered a half smile. "Not worried about that." For a moment, they simply stood there, two people brought together by chance, or maybe something more. Outside, the wind rattled the old window panes. The storm would come, but for tonight, there was warmth inside these walls. And perhaps Jonas thought it wasn't just the fields that had been empty for too long. Morning light spilled through the thin curtains like liquid gold, casting soft shadows across the modest kitchen. Jonas Whitaker stood by the window, nursing a cup of coffee, his eyes drawn once again to the figure out by the barn. Evelyn Marlowe, though she hadn't yet shared her last name, was moving gingerly, awkward in the way city folk always seemed when faced with dirt, tools, and livestock. Yet there was a quiet determination in her movements, as if she wanted desperately to contribute, to pull her weight. He watched as she struggled to lift a bucket of feed, her thin arms trembling slightly. Jonas set down his mug. "You're up early," he said as he stepped outside, his boots crunching on the gravel. Evelyn glanced over her shoulder, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "Figured I should help. Don't want to freeload." Jonas gave her a soft chuckle. "Ain't no freeloading if you're willing to lend a hand." She looked at him skeptically, unsure whether to believe him. Jonas had seen that guarded look before. Folks who'd been burned, who'd learned that kindness often came with strings attached. "I can show you how to handle that better," he offered, nodding to the bucket. For a split second, she hesitated. Then, almost like an instinct buried too long, she nodded. They worked side by side, the morning filled with simple tasks, feeding the chickens, mending a loose fence post, checking the soil. Nothing extraordinary, but there was comfort in routine, in knowing exactly what needed doing. Jonas moved patiently, explaining as they went, never rushing her. He noticed the way Evelyn flinched at sudden noises, the way her eyes darted whenever a car passed on the distant road, like she feared something or someone might appear. Still, she listened intently, soaking in every instruction, as if it were more than just farm chores, as if learning how to steady a fence post or fix a latch somehow steadied something inside herself too. By mid-morning, Maisie came bounding out of the house, her pigtails flapping. "Daddy, can we fly the kite?" "Today," she called, waving a brightly colored bundle in her hands. Jonas glanced up at the sky, clear, bright. The winds were favorable. He looked to Evelyn. "You ever flown a kite?" She shook her head, a shadow of something unreadable crossing her face. "No." Maisie's eyes widened. "You've never flown a kite? You gotta try. Daddy says the best kites are the ones you almost lose to the sky." Jonas grinned. She's not wrong. Evelyn glanced between them, lips twitching slightly, the faintest beginnings of a smile, something fragile and tentative. "Come on," Maisie tugged at her hand, all innocence. "You'll like it." Without another word, the three of them walked to the open field behind the barn. Jonas helped Maisie untangle the string, then handed the spool to Evelyn. The wind tugged at the fabric, and as Evelyn ran alongside Maisie, her laugh, small and surprised, escaped before she could stop. Jonas stood back, watching them, the image searing into his mind like sunlight after a long storm. He hadn't heard laughter like that in years. For a brief, shining moment, she looked like a woman unburdened, her dark hair whipping behind her, her face turned upward, chasing the wind, and then, as quickly as it came, the moment flickered and dimmed. Evelyn slowed, her eyes falling, and she handed the spool back to Maisie with a polite smile. Jonas didn't press. Some fences needed time to mend. Later that afternoon, after the chores wound down, Evelyn lingered by the old oak tree near the house. Jonas approached, wiping dirt from his hands. "You're quick to pick things up," he said casually. She shrugged, keeping her gaze on the horizon. "I've had to learn fast." He sensed there was more beneath those words. Whole stories left, unsaid, but he didn't pry. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small packet of seeds. "Sunflowers," he said, offering them to her. "Maisie and I usually plant them out front. You're welcome to join." Evelyn hesitated before accepting the packet, her fingers brushing against his briefly. She turned it over in her hands like it was something delicate. "I don't know if I have much of a green thumb," she murmured. Jonas gave her a half smile. "Sunflowers don't need much. Just a bit of care, a place to grow, and they'll find the sun." Their eyes met for a moment longer than necessary, the quiet between them carrying more weight than either spoke aloud. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the field. Tomorrow there would be more work, more fences to mend, more seeds to sow. But for now, there was the stillness of the evening, the soft hum of something fragile beginning to take root, and neither of them knew yet just how much would grow. Evening had settled over the fields like an old quilt, stitched with hues of lavender and gold. Inside the Whitaker farmhouse, the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and something sweet. Maisie's half-finished attempt at baking cookies. Jonas sat at the kitchen table nursing a cup of coffee, the radio humming softly in the background. Across from him, Evelyn sat quietly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She had volunteered to wash the dishes after dinner, though he told her she didn't have to. It was in her nature, it seemed, to repay kindness with action, even if it meant scrubbing plates until her knuckles turned red. Jonas had watched her all evening, noting the way she kept herself tucked in the corner of every room, never quite settling. She was polite, helpful, but always at arm's length, like a bird that had learned too many times how dangerous it was to land. Maisie, bless her heart, hadn't noticed. She chatted easily, showing Evelyn her school drawings and tugging her hand toward the window to point out constellations. But Jonas noticed. Now, as Maisie brushed her teeth in the other room, Jonas cleared his throat. "You've been a help. Around here. I appreciate it." Evelyn glanced up, her smile small but genuine. "It's nothing." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "You planning to stay long?" She looked down, fingers fiddling with the hem of her sleeve. "Just until I figure out what's next." Jonas nodded, not pushing further, but in the quiet between them, something hung heavy, something unspoken. Moments later, Maisie skipped back into the room, her face lit up. "Daddy, can we read the story tonight? The one about the tree that keeps giving," Jonas smiled. "Of course." He stood, but before following Maisie to her room, he glanced once more at Evelyn. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," he said gently. "No rush." She offered a faint nod, but her eyes remained distant. Later that night, the house settled into silence. The wind outside whispered against the windows, rustling the branches of the old oak tree. Jonas lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of Maisie's soft breathing from the next room. He couldn't shake the feeling that Evelyn was like one of those fences he'd spent a lifetime mending, strong in some places, broken in others. A woman running, not just from circumstance, but from herself. Suddenly a soft creak echoed down the hallway. Jonas rose quietly, stepping out of his room. The front door was slightly ajar, letting in the cool night air. He stepped onto the porch, scanning the yard. There she was, Evelyn, standing by the fence line, arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the moonlit fields. He walked down the steps, careful not to startle her. "You all right?" His voice was low, laced with genuine concern. She glanced over, visibly tense but trying to mask it. "Sorry, I couldn't sleep." Jonas leaned against the fence beside her, giving her space. Some nights are like that. For a while, neither spoke. The crickets filled the silence, the stars sprawling endlessly above. Finally, Evelyn let out a breath, voice barely above a whisper. "It's peaceful here." He nodded. Quiet has a way of forcing things to the surface. She glanced at him, something fragile flickering in her eyes. Then, almost like an afterthought, she asked, "Have you ever felt like you don't belong anywhere?" Jonas felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't answer right away, just stared out at the horizon, where the dark fields stretched beyond sight. "After my wife passed," he said finally, voice rougher than intended, "I felt like the world kept spinning, but I'd been thrown off." Evelyn's gaze softened, her fingers gripping the fence rail. "I stayed here because this land, these chores, Maisie, they anchored me, gave me a reason to keep going." He glanced sideways at her. "You don't have to tell me what you're running from, but sometimes staying put long enough helps you remember who you are." Evelyn swallowed hard, turning her face away. "It's not that simple." He nodded. "Rarely is." After another moment, she whispered, almost like a confession, "People expect things of you. They have plans, and when you can't live up to them, it's easier to disappear." Jonas said nothing, recognizing the weight behind those words, the exhaustion of always trying to fit into a mold someone else carved. The wind shifted, rustling the tall grass like an old lullaby. Without another word, Evelyn turned and walked back toward the house, her figure folding into the shadows. Jonas lingered a moment longer, staring out over the fields. He didn't know her full story yet, but something told him she wasn't the only one who'd been running. Morning came heavy with clouds, the scent of rain in the air. Jonas rose early, the familiar ache in his shoulders, the steady rhythm of another day calling. But when he stepped out to check the barn, something felt off. The tools he'd left stacked neatly were scattered, and down by the fence, fresh footprints in the dirt led away toward the road. Jonas's stomach dropped. Evelyn was gone. The morning sky hung heavy, a sheet of dull grey pressing low over the fields. Jonas stood by the fence line, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the road. The fresh footprints were still clear in the damp soil, trailing off toward nowhere. He hadn't slept after noticing them, had risen early, checked the barn, the tools, half hoping Evelyn had simply wandered down to the creek or needed a moment alone. But now, with each passing hour, the truth settled heavier on his chest. She was gone. Maisie came padding down the porch steps, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, where's Miss Evelyn?" Jonas swallowed, trying to keep his voice light. "She needed some air." Maisie tilted her head. "Will she be back?" He gave a quiet nod, though he wasn't sure why. Maybe. Inside, the house felt emptier than it had in weeks. Breakfast was quieter, even the old clock ticking on. The mantle seemed louder in the stillness. Jonas spent the afternoon mending a broken fence post out by the orchard. He swung the hammer rhythmically, each strike a futile attempt to quiet the gnawing unease. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered, thick on the horizon. The air smelled of approaching rain. That's when he saw her. Evelyn, standing near the edge of the property, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered against her face. She looked smaller somehow, as if the weight she carried had pressed her into herself. Jonas dropped the hammer without a word and walked toward her, heart pounding, not in anger but something else. Relief mixed with something softer, harder to name. She didn't speak, neither did he. Instead, he simply stepped aside, opening the gate, giving her the choice. After a long pause, she walked past him, eyes downcast, her steps uncertain. They stood beneath the old apple tree, its branches bare now except for a few stubborn leaves clinging on against the season's change. The tree leaned slightly, one limb cracked but not yet broken, weathered but still standing. Jonas glanced at her, his voice quiet. "Had me worried." Evelyn wiped rain from her cheek, avoiding his gaze. "I'm sorry. I thought leaving would be easier." He didn't press, didn't ask where she'd gone. Instead, he gestured toward the apple tree. "This tree's older than I am. My wife used to sit under it in the summers reading to Maisie." His eyes softened as he spoke. "One year, a storm split it clean down the middle. I figured it was done for. No point trying to save it." Evelyn glanced at the tree, following his gaze. "But I left it alone," Jonas continued. "Didn't pull it up, didn't cut it down. Thought maybe it deserved a chance." He met her eyes then, steady and without judgment. "Next spring, it bloomed twice as strong." Evelyn's lips parted slightly, as if to respond, but the words caught in her throat. Jonas took a step back. "You don't owe me explanations, but if you're tired of running, this place is big enough for people starting over." For a moment, the only sound was the wind rustling through the orchard. Then softly she whispered, "I didn't mean to stay this long." He gave her a small, almost sad smile. "Most things worth keeping aren't part of the plan." They stood there, the distance between them finally shrinking, not with grand gestures, but with quiet understanding. As the first drops of rain began to fall, Jonas turned. "Come inside. You'll catch cold." Evelyn hesitated, then followed. Later that evening, the storm tapped gently against the windows. Jonas sat by the fireplace, whittling a small piece of wood, while Maisie sprawled on the floor, coloring. Evelyn moved around the kitchen, her steps lighter than before. She brewed tea without being asked, set extra logs by the hearth. It wasn't much, but it was something. When she finally sat down across from him, Jonas didn't break the silence. He let the warmth of the fire fill the space between them. Maisie looked up suddenly. "Miss Evelyn, want to help me plant flowers tomorrow? Daddy says the soil's ready." Evelyn glanced at Jonas, uncertainty flickering. He met her gaze. "She's been wanting to plant sunflowers." A soft smile tugged at the corner of Evelyn's mouth, small but real. "I'd like that." Maisie beamed, satisfied. Outside, the storm moved on, leaving behind only the faint scent of rain and the sound of the wind settling. Jonas leaned back, watching as Evelyn tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her eyes reflecting something he hadn't seen before. Not quite peace, but maybe the first seed of it. The air buzzed with the kind of excitement only small-town festivals could conjure. A mingling of fried dough, laughter, and the faint sound of fiddles. Banners stretched across Main Street, fluttering in the breeze, and stalls brimmed with homemade pies, quilted crafts, and jars of honey glinting in the sun. Jonas hadn't planned to go this year. He usually avoided crowds, the cheerful noise amplifying the quiet in his chest since his wife passed. But Maisie had begged, her eyes shining, and Evelyn, after some coaxing, had quietly agreed to come along. Now, weaving through the throng, Jonas watched Evelyn out of the corner of his eye. She walked